Welcome back to the channel. Today we're working on the 1966 Galaxie 427 R Code. A few videos back, we were talking about muscle car prices, and you saw me pulling the carbs off of this car. They had been sent out for rebuilding, and now they're back, and we're going to put them back on and get this car running. It's been sitting for probably about 4 to 5 years. So, going to end up pulling a distributor, dropping the oil, filter, priming the engine again with fresh oil and a new filter, putting in new fuel in the tank with some Stabil to try to clean out anything or any residue that might have been in there. Don't know if that's going to work real well. The tank should be pretty clean because this is one of my old cars, and when I did the car, I pulled the tank, flushed it, and resealed it. Everything was crystal clean and clear in there, so hopefully not any problems with that, but we'll see. First thing I'm going to do is remove the towels and then remove any of the gaskets that were left behind after pulling the carbs and make sure that there's no residue left on the gasket mounting surfaces. Now I'm going to be installing the carburetors. There are two different carburetors, obviously it's primary and a secondary carburetor. The primary carburetor, C5AF9510-BD, mounts on the front carburetor pad of the intake. The secondary carburetor, C5AF9510-BC, mounts on the rear pad. Before the front primary carb can be installed, the accelerator bell crank has to be mounted to the secondary carb mounting studs, then bolted down. There are 8 unique nuts that hold the carburetors down on the intake. The bottom side of all the nuts has a small elevated flange to keep the sides of the nut from contacting the base plate of the carburetor to prevent damage. These nuts are available new from AMK Fasteners. Then you just tighten them all down on a nice crossing pattern to evenly pull the carburetor down the intake. But you guys know that already. Here I'm installing and checking the linkage to make sure it's operating properly from last time I put these carbs on this engine. Starting in 1965 on the Galaxies, Ford started using a cable-operated throttle linkage instead of the regular mechanical linkage that they use in all the previous models. Just got to make sure everything's working properly, the cable isn't bind, and the spring is set correctly. Installing this vacuum line between the front and rear carburetor secondary vacuum pods helps ensure equal vacuum gets to both pods under full throttle so that the secondaries open together. With the rubber fuel lines from the fuel log attached to each carburetor, the engine's now ready to fire up. She's up on jack stands, so let's drain the oil. The oil looks very clean, but I guess that should be expected since the car has been hardly driven since the whole time it's been together. While I'm letting the oil drain, probably a good time to talk about oil. What I prefer to use is AMSOIL Z-Rod. It comes in, I think this one is, 1040. I think it comes in 1030 and as well as 2050. My preference for a filter is a Napa Gold filter. It's a 1515. You can also, these are exactly the same. These are made by Wix and are exactly the same as the 51515 Wix filter. Still smells pretty good, so I think we're going to get away with not having to drain anything out, which is great. I'll put some fresh fuel in there with a little Stabil, and it should be fine.
it's a smart idea to pre-fill your oil filter with nice clean oil straight from the bottle.
Now, you're not watching an episode of Roadkill, so I am going to take the time to pull the distributor out and prime the engine, since it has sat for probably about 4 years or so. Now I'm going to take the time to mark the distributor location so I can put it back exactly where it was without having any problems. What I like to do is take my dummy distributor and the shaft, which I modified for oil priming, and set it right in the intake and then drop this in with the drill attached. Just makes it a lot easier, keeps everything nice and straight while you're priming. Now I'm just going to drop it in, let it guide me there, give it a turn. There it goes, dropped right down on the oil pump drive shaft. Now I'm just going to turn it counterclockwise and listen for a draw down on the drill. That way I know the engine is priming up. I felt the drill draw down. I could feel the engine prime. Ran for about 30 seconds, so I know I have oil to the top end of the engine. We're ready to fire. Perfect. I can see the cam of the distributor is really dry, so I'm going to take a very small drop of my 3% Molly and just put a little bit on there. Now, you might have been looking at this distributor and think to yourself it's kind of funny with only a single point. There's a reason for that. This car is a transistorized ignition system. What that means, it's a higher output than a standard dual point. Ford used these in some of these 427s, and by 66, pretty much all of them. Most cars didn't make it this far with the transistorized ignition system still in them. A lot of components in this little box right here would fail through the years. Guys had no clue on how to fix them, so they pulled them, just put regular standard dual point in it, and it ran fine. They were happy. They didn't have to deal with this anymore. When I got this car, I wanted to make sure this was fully functioning. I went through this and sorted it all out and got a fully functioning transistorized ignition system. You saw me prime all the fuel bowls. I'm going to go back to this one, since this is the primary fuel bowl and Venturi system that the car runs and idles off of. I'm going to put a little extra fuel in there, make sure it has enough to keep the engine running and draw fuel up from the tank. And a little down the throat doesn't hurt either. Now let's test the accelerator pumps. I think she's going to need a little more fuel, but for now I'm going to check for fuel leaks. I see a little one right there. Got a fuel leak right here. This clamp is no longer holding the hose tight enough. I have to fix that. These original type clamps are great. They just don't make them in the correct factory sizes anymore for the hoses. And either you got to crimp them too hard and it crushes a hose, or not enough like you see here, and you can get leaks. So I think for safety's sake, I'm going to put a regular hose clamp on this.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Adjust the timing, go over the carburetor, and it's ready for a test drive, and then off to its new owner.